The next two topics in our Introduction to Health Psychology module may be a review for many of you, but is incredibly important material that lays the foundation for the rest of the semester. We'll first cover research methods, which many of you have covered recently in a research methods course or experimental psychology course. Then, next week, we will cover biological foundations in health and illness, which many of you have covered in biology and anatomy and physiology courses. If you have not had this background, and this is either new material or material that you know you need a refresher on, I'm providing good videos and activities that will help you get where you need to go. So let's go over your list of readings and assignment for this week. You need to read Chapter 2, which should take you about an hour. I've also provided 7 supplementary readings. These are examples of current research in health psychology where you can see terminology from research methods in action. I've included a worksheet to help you look out for these key terms. This worksheet does not need to be turned in, but it will be used for the health profile and it's covered in the quiz. I provided you some videos to help you to consider topics more in depth. I found a variety of videos that go further into topics and research methods if anything is confusing to you or you want extra information. For many of you, these videos may be redundant with the chapter and you won't need to watch them. You have a health profile that requires you to read carefully 3 of the 7 articles that I've provided and apply it to your personal health experiences. This week's health profile does not require peer comments though. More on that later. Don't forget your module assignments. Keep in mind that your deadline is coming up soon and reference Blackboard for the worksheet, module assignment rubric, and prompt. So let's get started with some topics that will be covered in your chapter that are most important for you to consider. These encompass your first learning objective for this topic: to identify and interpret topics in research methodology within the psychological sciences and empirical articles relevant to health psychology. Empirical articles are research studies which evaluate specific hypotheses. It is getting the results straight from the horse's mouth. Textbooks provide a nice summary of research and are considered a secondary source, but a primary source can be found through academic journals that publish articles directly from the researchers. You'll be going through 7 of these this week. Going straight to the primary source in empirical articles helps you to figure out if interpretation was correct. For example, when you read an article in a newspaper or a magazine or see a media report on the latest findings in science, you can look up the article where the information came from and be sure it was correctly interpreted and critically analyze its methodology. So this brings us to the first topic of your chapter, which starts off with a section on critical thinking, which is scientifically based versus unscientific thinking impacted by belief bias. It's important to demonstrate the former over the latter for course assignments. What are some topics related to health where you've seen belief bias in play? There are old wives' tales about if you get cold and wet, you're going to get a cold, or when your parents or friends explain health complications by things that happened around the time they got sick that were likely just coincidental. Belief bias is often informed by the idea that correlation does not imply causation, and we need to be sure that things are examined systematically and rigorously through appropriate research methods. Your chapter begins and ends with this overarching message. In the end, it discusses inferring causality, cautioning against drawing false conclusions based on anecdotal experiences. 5 bits of advice are given. Evidence must be consistent. This means research must be replicable. Alleged cause must have been in place before the disease actually appeared, so it's necessary to use longitudinal and prospective studies. Relationships must make sense. They must be consistent with physiological findings. And the last 2 are similar and relate to how predictors and health outcomes are connected. There must be a dose-response relationship between risk factors and health outcomes, and the strength of association between alleged cause and health outcomes must suggest causality. These important points are based on the rigor of the research, which is why it is important that you understand the different research methods that are used in health psychology. Think about how they may differ and why one might be more appropriate than another. The articles I've assigned for your health profile are examples of these, and I've provided a worksheet for you to complete that will help you to think critically about these key vocab words. Let's quickly walk through the broad categories and terminology under these categories with which you will need to be familiar for your quiz and health profile assignments. First, for descriptive studies, these types of studies help you to formulate hypotheses that can be tested using more scientific methods. In other words, these provide a starting point through case studies, demographic surveys, and observational studies. These are all examples of correlational approaches where the researcher is looking for associations between different people and predictors of certain health outcomes. We'll go over surveys more in depth when we get to our module on stress. You will actually have to take different types of stress surveys, and I'll provide you a data set from the entire class for you to formulate hypotheses and propose experimental studies by which to test these hypotheses. One article you will read this week shows the rigorous process of developing these types of surveys. Another correlational design are developmental studies, which can be either cross-sectional studies where you are comparing different cohorts, or longitudinal studies where you're following people across time to see how they change. Experimental studies allow researchers to assess causality by randomly assigning participants to different conditions that they want to compare. The different conditions, or what the researcher is manipulating, is your independent variable. Experimental studies examine how the independent variable, or IV, impacts the dependent variable, or DV. Sometimes we want to compare groups, but we can't randomly assign such things like asthma, ADHD, or being overweight. In these situations, a quasi-experimental study is conducted. For behavioral genetics, these are research techniques to help to answer questions about how our nature or genetics influence and is influenced by our environment or nurture. In behavioral genetics, researchers usually look at a specific gene or use twin studies to estimate what percentage of traits can be explained by genetic factors. Epidemiology research focuses specifically on the incidence, prevalence, and origin of disease. This approach uses both retrospective, where they're looking back on people who currently have a disease, and prospective studies, where they track participants across time to see if they develop certain diseases. To find epi studies, you can look specifically at journals with epidemiology in their title. In epidemiology research, experimental studies are often random clinical trials, where certain treatments are tested in experimental design to find the best approach to improving health outcomes. A meta-analysis, the final type of research methodology I want you to be familiar with, is a little bit different because it's a way that researchers can compile similar studies to see what the consistent relation is between variables. For example, there could be one study that found a significant relationship between stress and getting sick during finals week, and another that didn't. Maybe one found a very strong relation, another one found one of weaker magnitude. So what's the real relation? A meta-analysis puts these studies' results together and provides a combined effect. For your second learning objective, I expect you to be able to find primary citations from secondary sources, such as finding articles cited in your textbook and locating primary sources for specific research questions. You'll have to demonstrate this skill throughout the semester on different health profiles and for some module assignments. Check out the tool I provided for you through the library that helps remind you about important ways to refine searches through their library tool. Just a reminder of your deadlines. As always, your health profile is due this Thursday by 5 p.m. and your quiz on Friday by 5 p.m. There are no comments that are necessary for your health profile this week. So, an introduction to your second health profile. For this week, you'll answer the following question. How does research help you understand your personal health? Using the articles provided on College Students in Health, outline at least 3 studies that contribute to your knowledge on your personal health. Now, don't forget your module assignment, where you need to identify one prevention program in the community that you believe is based upon theory and research relevant to health psychology. In the worksheet you must complete for this assignment, question 5 is most relevant to research methods. Go ahead and complete it once you finish your health profile for this topic. I hope you're settling well into this semester. Enjoy learning about research methods in health psychology.